Hi there, and good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and on the web, we are at jimbotalk.net. Vice President Cheney's been making a lot of appearances of late. Obviously, his locations are no longer undisclosed, but certainly frequent. And he has not been happy with what he sees as a weakening of the nation's defenses. He believes that the administration, specifically Secretary Janet Napolitano's Department of Homeland Security, are making Americans less safe. Well, Napolitano takes issue with that, telling CNN, I can look you in the eye and look at the American people in the eye and say every day we think about the safety of the American people. We think about protection from terrorist acts abroad. We think about terrorist acts internally. Well, what about that? Let's talk tonight with return guest Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy. And Frank, I'd be curious of your thoughts just about that.
Jim, thanks for having me. The principal thought is that it may well be true that Janet Napolitano thinks about the security of the American people every single day. I would hope so. That's her job, after all. The question is she doing things about enhancing our security, or is she doing things that I believe may be actually undermining our security? Whatever she thinks she's doing, I think that may be the practical effect. And as we've talked about many times in the past, unfortunately, this is not a world in which I think we have the kind of margins of error that we've enjoyed in the past, that historically our oceans have kept us safe, our friendly neighbors to north and south, despite our porous borders, were generally seen as buffer states against any serious problem to the internal security of the United States. That's simply no longer true. And I think if you go through sort of both the rhetoric and the policies that Janet Napolitano has been espousing, embracing, promoting, you got to say, whatever it is she's thinking, the effect is likely to be very, very ominous for American security interests.
What should this administration be doing that it isn't, or the other way around? What is it doing that it shouldn't be doing?
Well, look, there are three broad categories that seems to me they should be doing things other than what they're doing. The first category is I think we should be maintaining the security posture, if not strengthening it, that was bequeathed to this administration by its predecessor. At the risk of generalizing somewhat, I think the Bush administration, despite some disagreements I had with him, to be sure, nonetheless was trying from the very, very first moments after 9/11, sadly not before, but from certainly that point forward, to think hard about learning the lessons of 9/11, maintaining the kinds of offensive power projection capabilities that enable us to engage our adversaries and hopefully defeat them far removed from our shores, and to, develop, considerably improve our internal security arrangements, starting with this bureaucratic reorganization of the Department of Homeland Security. And then quickly, Jim, just two other things that are very important as well. One is we need to discourage, not embolden, our enemies. We should be pressing them sharply. We should be defying their demands, not acceding to them, because I think when we do the latter, it simply has the effect of intensifying their aggressive behavior. And finally, we need to be standing with our allies, not abandoning them, undermining them, or otherwise putting them in greater jeopardy. And those are three areas that I think the Obama administration is pretty consistently getting things wrong.
Did Secretary Napolitano really try to change the term terrorism to man-caused disasters. I honest to God read that and thought I was reading part of a Saturday Night Live skit.
This is no joke.
She honest to God said that.
She did, yeah.
How vacuum-headed stupid do you have to be?
Well, Jim, it's not an isolated, one-off problem. This was part and parcel, I think, of an executive branch-wide effort to simply change the policy direction. And to start with, they've started changing how we talk about these things. If you're dealing with man-caused disasters as opposed to terrorism, then, the whole idea that you need to deal with terrorism as an urgent, even emergency situation can be sort of shelved in favor of a more deliberate thing that says, well, we got to worry about tornadoes, and we got to be worried about hurricanes, we got to be worried about earthquakes, we got to be worried about things that man causes, and it just recalibrates the whole sense of urgency and purpose, and I think that's partly what she was doing. But Eric Holder, has engaged in a similar kind of dumbing down of the rhetoric. Look, the Office of Management and Budget no longer calls our military operations. They're overseas contingency operations, not wars. And so I think this is the kind of the first of those three things we should be doing differently that I was talking about a moment ago. Don't dumb down for the American people what we're engaged in here. Talk to them honestly about the threats that are emerging and ask them to make the sacrifices that are necessary to counter them effectively, not dissemble, not suggest to them that there's really nothing to worry about here.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. I remain worried, and I remain worried in part because of stuff like this. Not enough that I have to be worried about the people with malevolent intent toward us. Now I have to be worried about the people on this side who don't seem to realize there are people with malevolent intent out there. All right, more to come as we talk with Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy, on the web at centerforsecuritypolicy.org. Is there another website, as I recall?
Well, there's one that's easier to remember, Jim, which is just www.securefreedom.org.
SecureFreedom.org is easier to remember. All right, more to come. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 on the Jim Bohannon Show. Buckle up or you will get stuck with a ticket. Click it or ticket. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We'll be back here at Westwood One. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. We're talking with Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy, and on the web, go to securefreedom.org as we talk about just what is being done by the Department of Homeland Security. After all, they've got a pretty important job out there. Their secretary is Janet Napolitano, and there was a report recently released by the staff of Ms. Napolitano warning of the threat posed by veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and other right-wing extremists. Again, I must ask you, this is not a joke. That was actually written, supposedly, I guess, vetted by somebody and officially released by the department?
Yeah, it was, and her explanation, defense really of it, was that, we've got to look at all threats, and I think that's not unreasonable as far as it goes. It's just that what this study clearly imputed to these returning veterans was a threat, and by association, all right-wing elements, extremists, if you will, but in the eyes of the beholder, sometimes extremists are not, sometimes they might well be, but it cast this rather slanderous aspersion against all of those veterans returning from distant battlefields where they've been serving their country, and imputed to them this sort of Timothy McVeigh kind of mad Rambo-esque vigilante that I think there's simply no basis for, in fact. And it was offensive. It aroused, as you know, Jim, an enormous amount of controversy. And again, one of the things that's worrisome about Janet Napolitano is there's not been a whole lot of evidence that she really has thought better of it. I think she apologized for giving offense, but there was no retraction of this proposition that the enemy that we have to be most concerned about in this country, this sort of was the suggestion of the study, are conservatives, whether they're in the uniform or formerly in uniform or civilians, when there are an awful lot of people that I think you can quite reasonably point to, as we've talked about in my previous appearances with you, no kidding, are trying to destroy this country. Make no bones about wanting to destroy this country. And instead of talking about them or focusing our efforts on them or, trying to penetrate the political correctness that is generally used to protect them, we are focusing on a community that I think is among the least dangerous, least threatening to this country and its constitutions and its freedoms.
Well, obviously. I mean, good heavens, I don't always agree with President Obama, but he would never, ever, ever, ever say a thing like that. I mean, you're telling me that not only was this released by the Department of Homeland Security about the threat posed by veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and other right-wing extremists, lumping them all together, but that the apology was merely that she didn't mean to give offense, that the apology wasn't along the lines of this was an egregious error by my staff and I'm deeply sorry? Was that it?
Said that I haven't heard it, Jim. Maybe she's said it very quietly, but I all that has been heard thus far is a defense, actually, of the substance of the study and just this slight apologia concerning inadvertently, unintentionally, and happily giving offense perhaps to some veterans groups.
All right. Now then, let us talk a little bit about our porous borders. As I understand it, Ms. Napolitano, who as governor of Arizona should have had a first-hand understanding of what it means to be invaded, has now suspended workplace raids aimed at apprehending illegals. Is that right?
Yeah, I think she has, and among other things, we've backed away, it appears, from the idea of putting up a real barrier along the border. There's a virtual fence, as they call it, that is going to be progressing painfully slowly. But the difference between the two is the real barrier is designed to stop people from getting in. A virtual fence is designed to, with a little bit of luck, help you tell where people who got in went.
So in other words, it's like putting it on pay-per-view. We're not actually trying to stop anything, but we can all watch.
Well, that's right.
Isn't that just special?
Watch and maybe take action after the fact, but on the other hand, maybe they get clean away. But that's another example of this attitude that it's so yesterday, really, to be worrying about borders and immigration. We can solve it with comprehensive reform. We've heard that, haven't we, before?
Well, it depends on what the reform is. Reform is a term that can be used for a lot of things, including, I mean, let's face it, change can be change for the better or change for the worse. I mean, I have to ask you, and I know that we're going to be engaged in a little guessing game here, but I want you to be as honest as you can and as fair as you can. If you could crawl inside the mind of people like this, what are they really thinking? I believe, this is my take, that what they're really thinking is that borders are so last century, and that we should all just be able to go anywhere we want to, and if it causes some burden to the American taxpayer, well, that's all right. We owe it to the world. Now, I'm not really trying to be a caricature of anything here. I think that is the honest view of people who are smart enough not to say that. Now, do you think I'm being fair?
Let me put an even finer point on it, because I think what you said is basically correct. President Obama has taken that bit that you remember from his rock star campaign swing through Europe during the campaign, that bit about citizens of the world, to a logical conclusion in appointing a guy not in Janet Napolitano's organization, but in the State Department, the senior lawyer there, job known as the legal advisor, a person by the name of Harold Coe. And in Harold Coe, you have the sort of epitome of this kind of transnational view of the world. That as you say, the nation-state really must yield to the greater good of a kind of universal jurisprudence, as he calls it, and the idea that our Constitution must be considered by judges as just another of the factors that they contemplate as they decide on their rulings, together with the rules or the laws or the constitutions or the pronouncements even of international bodies and other governments. It's this kind of notion that I think is evident in much of what Janet Napolitano is doing, what Eric Holder is doing, what the president himself is doing. And yes, at the end of the day, it is the antithesis of a sovereign America that they're espousing, and I think that they're serving, despite the fact that they've all sworn oaths. Harold Coe hasn't yet because he's still awaiting confirmation by the Senate, which I hope won't be forthcoming, by the way. But the others have all sworn oaths to uphold and defend or protect the Constitution of the United States. Mm-hmm. That's not what they're doing, I'm afraid. And heaven help this country if they're successful in promoting this transnationalist agenda.
We have had, of course, a great deal of discussion about whether or not Bush administration officials should be prosecuted for allowing alleged torture of detainees. Should we be more concerned that the prosecution might not even be taking place on American soil, but in the world court or something of that nature? Could you see this administration extraditing Bush administration officials to courts outside the jurisdiction of this country? And I know for a lot of people that sounds like scaremongering. I ask it as a serious question. Could you see that happening?
Eric Holder has said, the Attorney General of the United States has said he will cooperate with this Spanish judge by the name of Galzon, who prosecuted Pinochet extraterritorially, and who has apparently set his sights on these 6 Bush administration lawyers who he thinks wrote the torture memos, as they're so-called. I think it is not outside the realm of the possible. And here's the fillip on this, Jim. The trigger mechanism for the World Court or the International Criminal Court or Judge Galzon's and the others around the world who think of this universal jurisprudence in much the same way Harold Coe does, is if we don't prosecute people ourselves. That automatically opens the game up to them. Now, Galzon is not waiting for us to prosecute, but I think you may well see this kind of mindset prompting an administration that has said they're not going to prosecute these guys, but seemingly is not adverse to having somebody else do it.
Well, I will take a break on what I consider to be a positive note, and I'll tell you why. Because if they do that, they lose in 2012. And there are upsides to almost anything. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 on the Bohannon Show. Frank Gaffney is our guest. We'll be back here at Westwood One. Yeah, it looks like the Jim Bohannon Show from where I'm sitting, and we have Frank Gaffney as our guest. He's president of the Center for Security Policy, their website, securefreedom.org. We've been talking about some ways in which, from a column written for the Washington Times by Frank back on Tuesday, some columns that would indicate he has some serious questions as to whether or not we are, in fact, being made more safe or less safe by this administration. Okay, just a quote from your column. The Obama administration has submitted a budget to Congress that would deny state and local governments currently incarcerating illegal aliens the federal help they heretofore have received to defray the associated costs. And you add, if that is allowed to stand, the inevitable result would be to release into the general population thousands of possibly dangerous aliens, compounding our homeland insecurity problem. Now, that is in their budget, right? Their proposal to Congress.
Right.
Not an oversight. You think this is a firm and official policy?
It's an oversight. This is geared towards a constituency that this president has worked hard to cultivate, principally Hispanic, that is resentful of harsh treatments that have been meted out in some jurisdictions, at least, not all by any means, but in some jurisdictions, to people who have come to this country illegally. Some of whom have come here for the old-fashioned economic opportunities that America has, at least until recently, offered in abundance. Some, unfortunately, there's reason to believe, have come here to do us harm. And there's very little doubt, Jim, that those who wish to do the latter have found their way into the same trafficking operations, human smuggling, arms smuggling, drug smuggling operations that have taken advantage of the porous border that we were discussing before the break. So I think when the president is saying to jurisdictions, look, you're on your own. You want to hold these people, you pay for it. He's sending a powerful message not only to those authorities at the local and state level in most cases, he's sending a message to the folks who have wanted to roll back, such as it was, the Bush administration's latter-day efforts to get a little bit more serious about the problem of internal security arising from, among others, illegal aliens.
I can draw a distinction between someone who holds up a 7-Eleven to feed their crack habit and someone who holds up a 7-Eleven to buy food for their family, but it doesn't alter the fact that in each case you're talking about somebody who held up a 7-Eleven, and in each case here we're talking about someone who broke some other laws of this land. Well, let's go to Mike in Charlottesville, Virginia. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, guys, I'm wondering, I think Mr. Gaffney was a rule of law person when President Clinton lied about an affair, and I think Mr. Gaffney was happy to impeach Mr. Clinton at that time. What happened to the rule of law now? Why should the United States be the only country on the face of the planet that is harboring torturers without consequence?
Well, first of all, you've got to define torture, Mike, and no one has definitely defined this as torture, number one. And number two, there is a difference between national laws and alleged international laws. There's a huge difference there.
Well, we've signed a torture treaty. In fact, Ronald Reagan signed that torture treaty. And Ronald Reagan, when he signed that torture treaty, said under no circumstances will the United States ever torture. And we have tortured. Waterboarding. Well,
you say that it's torture. 73% of the people who took our poll said it's not. So whatever.
Yeah, 73% of your people. Let them go waterboard themselves.
Look, Mike, I don't know if this has not occurred to you, but the standard of what is or is not torture is not what will be done to a passing random citizen. If in fact I was accused, Mike, of committing a terrorist act against this country, that would be a little bit different. But the standard for what is or is not torture does not amount to whether or not it is uncomfortable to the average citizen in this country.
So you don't care about the rule of law?
I do care about the rule of law. I care about a rule of law that recognizes that there are some people out there who are trying to do us serious harm, and that the law must make allowances for the fact that they will bend, distort, and pervert the system in any way possible for their ends. The law has to recognize that and not pretend that the standards are whether or not it would make passing Joe citizen uncomfortable or not.
Well, that's not the standard for the rule of law.
That's the standard we were just talking about.
Before it should be prosecuted again. But let me try it this way. If torture is such a good idea...
I don't think torture is a good idea, Mike, and you're not going to stick those words in my mouth. What you claim to be is torture, okay?
Jim, if waterboarding works and it saved lives, why aren't we waterboarding every insurgent we capture with C4 in Iraq?
I have no problem with that if they think that it would be helpful in obtaining information. But let's defer to our guest for a moment. Frank, you care to weigh in on this conversation?
Well, I hate to interrupt a perfectly good rant there, Jim. I thought you were on a roll. Look, I think that waterboarding is not torture. I think we use it on a very limited basis because we find in many cases that it's unnecessary. Where we have found it necessary to do it on, I think, 3 occasions is what we've been talking about in the, or 3 instances, three cases, I should say. We have done so because the information that we believe the individuals had and that they were determined not to share with us could only be extracted that way. It turned out, apparently, based on memos that the President and the executive branch will not release, but that Vice President Cheney has seen and has talked about publicly, that there was undoubtedly salutary results from those applications of waterboarding, and that saved lives of a considerable number of Americans. So in this circumstance, I don't think it's inconsistent with the rule of law. I think, to the contrary, it's necessary to ensure that the rule of law survives in this country.
I've got two responses to that. I can't think of anything more urgent and more pressing than saving American lives in Iraq. Last month, 19 people died in Iraq, several of them from IED explosions. Mm-hmm. We are capturing insurgents, and we would like to know where those explosives are coming from and how these cells are constructed. If torture works, and it's such a good idea, I don't know why we're not doing it there. Furthermore, we're engaged in a war on drugs in America. Have you ever seen what meth does to a person? What meth does to people's daughters?
I'm aware that, having shifted the topic, I'm well aware of the problems of many illegal drugs, including meth, yes.
If waterboarding works, why aren't we waterboarding every person? And it's not torture, right? So why not waterboard every person that's caught with meth, find out who their dealer is, and trace it all the way back to the factory so that we can end the drug scourge in America tomorrow? The reason is because it's a vile thing, and not only does it hurt the person that's being waterboarded, it turns the people doing the waterboarding into animals.
Oh, really? Are you convinced that automatically the process turns people who do it into animals?
I think people that torture...
But in your definition of torture, Now, let me ask you this, because, Mike, you've called before, and you are an honest person, and you don't have to worry about being reelected. So I expect an honest answer from you that we would never get from Janet Napolitano. I'll bet you that if you were the Attorney General, you would send Dick Cheney straight to that Spanish judge, wouldn't you?
If there was evidence that he authorized all this stuff, and I think there is, but I don't have any in front of me.
Let's assume that there is. Let's assume that there is. You would send the former Vice President of the United States to be tried by a court outside the jurisdiction of this country, wouldn't you?
You know what? I'm a UVA law student that's taken international law, and from a Republican professor, John Norton Moore, I'm not the only one that would send him to an international. But
you would. Okay, well, that's fine. We have an honest answer from Mike.
We tried Charles Taylor's son here in the United States for torturing people in his country. If we can try people from other countries for violations of international law, there's no reason our leaders in this country can't be held to the same standard.
All right, very good.
Otherwise, it's not the rule of law.
Very good. Okay, Mike has just elevated international law, quote unquote, to the level of overriding all other considerations. Now, my guess would be that if the administration were honest, that is precisely what they would do. And I appreciate Mike's honesty. I just wish the administration would campaign on that, and then we could be saying goodbye to them in January of 2013. Frank Gaffney, any thoughts as we go to the break?
Well, be careful what you wish for, Jim. I think we may well see them, if not explicitly embracing this kind of idea, as we talked about earlier, of prosecuting our people under unaccountable judges and court systems.
Yes, who exactly? Just I suddenly realized, yes, who appointed these judges, and were they confirmed by a legislative body I helped elect? I don't believe so.
Not at all. And to the contrary, you will find their interest in our accountable system of government, our checks and balances, our Constitution, to be probably a passing curiosity at best, and I don't think that's the kind of rule of law we want.
Well, thank God it's a rule of law. It's just a law that we have absolutely no control over.
Right.
Yeah, some law. All right, we'll take a break. More to come on the Bohannon Show. Bayer Advanced, innovative lawn and garden solutions. Bayer Advanced, better science, better results. Back after these messages. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Frank Gaffney is our guest. He is with the Center for Security Policy, their website, securefreedom.org. We're looking at some of the problems that he sees in the Department of Homeland Security under Janet Napolitano. Now, there is a group that we talked about the other night with a different guest, but that is something that I think we ought to get a different perspective on tonight as well, as we talk about another group. I'll just quote again from the editorial that Frank wrote for the Washington Times. Another group of dangerous aliens Mr. Obama seems determined to unleash on the American people. Ms. Napolitano's organization may have to cope in the near future with 70 Chinese Uyghurs trained in terrorism in Afghanistan. They've been held in recent years at Guantanamo Bay, reportedly are slated for release in Alexandria, Virginia, which for those outside the immediate national capital area, that is an inner suburb and a couple of subway stops away from the centers of power in your nation's capital. The guest we had on before said that it was not entirely clear that these people were terrorists per se. They certainly had a leader with ties to Al-Qaeda, which is very disturbing, but that they claim that they are merely opposed to Chinese oppression of their group and are not anti-American per se. Your take, Frank?
You and I have talked in the past, Jim, about the program that authoritative Islam calls Sharia.
Oh, yes.
The Uyghurs, like, as far as I know, every other occupant of Guantanamo Bay, adhere to Sharia. And that tells you basically everything you need to know. Sharia, of course, is a theopolitical legal program that is designed to govern all aspects of life, from how an individual practices their faith, their prayers, what they eat, what they don't eat, and so on, all the way up to how the world is run. And that's the point. When you get to those how the world should be run kinds of questions, those who subscribe to Sharia believe it must be run by a global theocrat. And as a result, all governments, not just the Chinese government, but all governments, including that of the United States, that stand in the way of the realization of this Islamic theocracy pursuant to Sharia under a caliph, are enemies, must be, by definition, enemies of Sharia-adherent Muslims. And therefore, I think it is the height of folly, not to say recklessness, to have people suggest that, well, as long as they only wanted to kill Chinese infidels, they won't have any problem with us. Therefore, let's turn them loose, as you say, within spitting distance of the seat of government of this country, to say nothing of untold thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Americans who may be exposed to their violent ways.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, I would not be one who would be thrilled with their presence here. And my thought has always been that even if there is a question about them, that when in doubt, you don't. So what I guess if we give them to the Chinese would probably summarily execute them, right?
Well, so they say. Torture them, execute them, be beastly to them, whatever it is. It is used by those who seek their release as an excuse not to turn them over to the Chinese, who would take them. One of the relatively few examples of people who would take them. But the alternative of keeping them securely housed in Guantanamo Bay, which has been foreclosed, it would appear, unless he flips on this, as he has flipped on just about everything else he's announced in this sort of portfolio of counterterrorist activities. President Obama has ostensibly foreclosed that idea by saying he's going to close Guantanamo Bay. And these particular individuals have been subject of a lawsuit by lawyers who are seeking their release, and a federal judge has said, yeah, they should be turned loose. So that's what we're anticipating. The president may do it any time. And I think, again, it is the most short-sighted of attitudes, and I think you're seeing on both sides of the aisle, with the notable exception of Jim Moran, who represents Alexandria for the moment, who has said, it's Alexandria's patriotic duty to take these guys. I don't know of anybody else in the United States, basically, certainly in elective office, who's volunteering to bring these guys in and let them go in their constituencies.
Yes, that again, I can't believe that the electoral consequences of this. I mean, these people only have to be engaged in one case of jaywalking, and it all comes crashing down. Well, more to come. There's another aspect to this particular story. It's called the Real ID Act. We'll talk about that with Frank Gaffney when we come back here at Westwood One. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. Frank Gaffney is our guest. He is the president of the Center for Security Policy, on the web at securefreedom.org. We're talking about these Chinese Uyghurs trained in terrorism. Now, apparently, Secretary Napolitano also intends to try to get repealed the Real ID Act. What is that, and what are the implications of this, Frank?
This is one of the most worrying of the bill of particulars that we've just gone through, Jim. The Real ID Act was a piece of legislation, controversial at the time, to be sure, but nonetheless that was adopted by the Congress, not immediately after 9/11, but shortly thereafter, on the recommendation of the 9/11 Commission, which found that one of the most serious vulnerabilities that we had at the time, that was exploited to the hilt by the attackers on that date, was that fraudulent identification documents could be easily obtained in the form of driver's licenses. I think between them, the 19 hijackers had several dozen legal driver's licenses from various states, several of them multiple driver's licenses. So the Real ID Act was intended to try to get each state to live up to a standard that required documentation so that you knew the individual who was being given a driver's license was the proper individual, so identified, and that it would be very difficult fraudulently to generate and distribute these IDs. I'm told, Jim, that all but 4 states now have taken major strides to meet the requirements of the Real ID Act, but Janet Napolitano apparently has decided that she wants to stand with the 4 recalcitrants and undo the good work that is being done by the other 46, and more to the point, to institute, with the help of a frankly senile senator by the name of Daniel Akaka from Hawaii, whose state is one of those that is not pursuing the Real ID Act implementation, an alternative piece of legislation that would essentially relegate us back to the standard of pre-9/11, that is to say, fraudulent IDs all around.
Here, let's see if we get a quick call from Bill in Springfield, Illinois. Quickly, Bill.
Hi, Jimbo. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr.
Thank you.
Gaffney. It's a pleasure. Regarding the call earlier from Mike, my question is, and I have difficulty trying to frame this, but I think Jimbo pointed out well that there seems to be a lack of legal precedent or definition for what exactly composes torture. To that end, I'm curious as to how Mike would figure that in times of war we could grant our president or our elected officials the right to declare war and or target actions that would lead to the inevitable death of targets or, sanctioned military targets.
Yeah, it is a great question, one that the answer to which we'll have to wait for another time, but it is one that we should all be pondering, and I think that is a great note on which to wrap here, Bill. Thank you. Frank Gaffney again from the Center for Security Policy on the web at securefreedom.com, and this is Westwood One. Well, good evening and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and on the web, we are at jimbotalk.net. Well, the end of the Cold War was a triumph for democracy, but since that time now, have free societies lost their way in this world? Let's talk about this tonight with our guest. He is Dr. Paul Ray, historian of political philosophy, professor of history at Hillsdale College in Michigan. His career is focused on studying the origins and evolution of self-government in the West, and he has now written Soft Despotism, Democracy's Drift. What exactly are we talking about here, this soft despotism, Professor Ray?
It's a phrase that was coined by Alexis de Tocqueville more than 170 years ago. In Democracy in America, and he used it to describe what he feared might be the trajectory not of the United States, but of France. His worry was that in the wake of the French Revolution, with the destruction of all local institutions, the destruction of all social differences and political differences, in a situation of equality, human beings would find themselves in the grips of what he called inquiétude, a French word that means uneasiness or anxiety. Montesquieu, who influenced Tocqueville, described it as fear without a certain object. It's the fear that one experiences when one is in a situation where there seem to be forces beyond one's control, but one doesn't quite know what they are, that shape the situation in which one lives. And he feared that in these circumstances, steadily, slowly, unobtrusively, human beings, citizens, would seek the help of the government and would trade their liberty and their freedom for a promise, a false promise, in fact, of security. And they would do so without even paying attention to the manner in which they were doing it. He looked for a remedy, and he came to the United States in the 1830s, and he thought he found one here. What he found was that Americans weren't inclined to be wards, dependents, subjects of a centralized administration like his fellow citizens in France. They were citizens in the fullest sense of the word. They were active in local self-government, and almost everything in America was done by local self-government. Through local self-government, they learned what he called the art of association, and they formed civil associations, private organizations for public purposes, building hospitals, building schools, building churches, building roads, taking care of the poor. All of this was done outside of government, he found, and that amazed him. And it was done by individual citizens banding together. He also found that the Americans were strongly religious. They had a sense of themselves as children of God, so they didn't have a sense of inquietude or uneasiness with regard to their place in the cosmos. They had a firm sense of their own dignity, and they weren't likely to give up their liberties or to allow them to be encroached upon because of the sense of pride they had in being children of God. Furthermore, they had a strong sense of morality, so they weren't at sea with regard to what was good and what was evil, and they had strong families. Montesquieu, whom Tocqueville greatly admired, had once remarked that a Frenchman is unlikely to want to speak with another man about his wife because he is afraid the other man might know her better than he does. Adultery was commonplace in France, and Tocqueville found that in America it wasn't, that there was almost no divorce, that women chose their own husbands, and they stuck to them, and they made it work. And the consequences, when a man came home from work, he came home to domestic harmony rather than domestic uneasiness. The consequence of this was that Americans weren't in the grips of inquietude to the degree that the French were. They had a sense of confidence in themselves, morally, through their families, but also in their capacity through civic agency in private organizations or through local self-government to face up to problems that appeared before them. When I was working on this, and I come at it as an historian, working on Montesquieu on England and on Rousseau on commercial society and then on Tocqueville, I asked myself, is this the America I live in?
I was just going to ask you, let's move Tocqueville ahead a century and a half. What would he write today?
He would write, that I believe, that the United States has been infected by the French disease. That is to say that we're not as far along on the road as the French are, but that we've given up our advantages. Local self-government, we don't really have it anymore. The government in the localities is driven by the federal government. It offers people money in exchange for accepting all sorts of restrictions. And so if you're elected to state senate or state house, if you're elected to city council, if you're elected to a school board, most of what you do is comply with federal regulations that you've accepted on condition of federal largesse. So in taking money out of our pockets, the federal government also takes power away from us locally, and then it dictates back to the state governments. It's at an extreme right now where Barack Obama has told the state of California they're going to have to change their budget or he's not going to let them have bailout money. So he's dictating to the state of California. It's really quite a remarkable situation, but it's a very dramatic form of what's gone on for a long, long time, going back to the Johnson administration.
I personally have no problem with strings attached to federal monies. I guess the issue here, in my mind, would be whether or not certain things should be paid for by federal dollars in the first place.
Well, that's an important issue, a very important issue. But strings attached are perfectly legitimate. For example, if the federal government appropriates money to be used to build interstate highways in California, it is perfectly appropriate that the federal government dictate that the money be used in the way that it was intended to be used. But to have restrictions that have absolutely nothing to do with the expenditure of the money, that really, unfunded mandates, these are called, or partially funded mandates. What it means is you're extending your control over the prerogatives of these other organizations that really aren't subordinate to you, that are supposed to be autonomous. By the way, the same thing happens with universities and colleges. And once the federal government begins to spend this money, it's very tempting for them to use it for leverage over local policy.
Of course, one thing, we've gotten into the habit, of course, of not paying for the things that we buy, just simply putting it on the gross national credit card, and we'll let our kids and grandkids worrying about pulling out of the monstrous debt that we've given them a few decades hence after all of today's decision makers are long gone. Of course, the federal government can do that because it has over on the 14th Street printing presses and large vats of green ink, something that states lack. Is that part of what has driven a lot of this decision-making and budget-making and power of the purse to the top government in this country as opposed to the state and local governments?
That's a good part of it. Another aspect of it is, it goes back to 1913 with the 16th Amendment legalizing the federal income tax. Suddenly, the federal government potentially has control over our entire incomes. And the 17th Amendment decouples the state government from the federal government, also passed in 1913, pressed by Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and the progressives generally. It decouples it in the following way. Before 1913, the Constitution provided that the state legislatures pick the senators. After 1913, they were directly elected. Mm-hmm. The change means that the state governments have no check on the activities of the federal government. And it opened the door to this use of federal largesse as a way of controlling state government and private organizations. Let me mention a concrete example of this that might bring it home to you. And it comes from the right, interestingly enough. James Buckley was senator from New York. He was the brother of William F. Buckley. Mm-hmm. And he secured, and he was a conservative, not even a Republican, and he secured the passage of just a line item in a bill that any university, public, private, that took federal money couldn't provide grades or any information about students to parents. Now, the effect of this is, once upon a time, when I was teaching at the University of Tulsa, which took federal money, I had a student, a freshman. He showed up. He was in my honors class. He came to 2 meetings, and then he disappeared, and I figured he'd dropped. Then a month later, he showed up. And I called the dean and I said, there's something very wrong here. And they looked into it and found out that he was living in a room in a fraternity surrounded by empty whiskey bottles. He was a binge alcoholic. And then there was a debate. Could we call his parents? And the conclusion of the debate was it was strictly illegal, that all the money that the university got from the federal government could be lost if we did this, and then they decided to do it anyway. And the parents were very grateful. But the point is, what was James Buckley doing? He was doing what the federal government does at every step of the way. He was saying, my opinion is more important than the judgment of the people on the spot, the local people. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to dictate, because I am all-wise, to those down below.
I'm wondering how we increase the empowerment of the people if we were to, let's say, go back to the days when state legislatures picked members of the U.S. Senate. Would that necessarily be a remedy?
It would. I don't think we're going to get there.
Well, I honestly would be among those who would try to keep us from getting there.
Yeah, I think it was a well-designed Constitution that the American founders
in some ways. I mean, but
they
know that they also thought
we provide for local autonomy.
Well, they also thought that white guys with money should have the preponderant power and be able to vote. They also thought that some of us should buy and sell others of us. The founding fathers did a wonderful job, but far from a perfect job.
The founding fathers were mostly anti-slavery, including people from
nonetheless, it was
Virginia
sanctified in the Constitution, and in fact, they even referred to the trade in other persons that was to end in 1808. Obviously, I'm talking about them collectively.
They deliberately left out the notion that they didn't talk about a trade in other persons. Actually, they used vague language. They did the thing that you're talking about, but they avoided language that would suggest that it was just. And that issue came up in the constitutional.
All I'm saying is that they were far from perfect. They did a superb job in writing a marvelous document, arguably the best political document in history, but far from perfect.
I would agree they were far from perfect, but I also, by the way, don't think that they believed in the rule of the rich. They expected in the states that people would have some property, but the amount of property that was required was so low that something like 70% of the people had that property, and the ones who didn't were children and young adults who hadn't yet earned enough to buy some land.
So there were no people disenfranchised in the early days of the Constitution by a lack of personal income or wealth.
No. Not for long, anyway.
Oh, well, I don't know. To me, long is a devil in the details. Anyway, we're overdue for a break. We'll come back. We'll talk some more about a remarkable look at who we are and where we may be headed, or perhaps we're already on the way. Soft Despotism, as the name of this book, Democracy's Drift, written by our guest, Professor Paul Ray. 1-866-50-JIMBO is the number, and we'll be right back here at Westwood One. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show as we talk tonight with Professor Paul Ray, the author of Soft Despotism, Democracy's Drift. There's certainly unquestionable ways in which we could be heading in some seriously questionable directions out there. I'm wondering about other aspects of this. For example, when the federal government intervened massively, and it certainly did, to end the segregation in this country, was that an example of soft despotism?
No, it's actually something entirely legitimate, and it should have been done long before. If you go back and look at the Civil War amendments to the Constitution, they were designed to correct one of the defects of the Constitution, which had to do with slavery and the legacy of slavery. And they empowered Congress to act to guarantee the rights of African Americans, and Congress chose, as Congress often does, to run away once Reconstruction was over. And in fact, things got worse after that. When the progressives came into power in 1912, when Woodrow Wilson became president, he actually extended Jim Crow to Washington, D.C., and really to the whole country by segregating the civil service. In the late 19th century, when the civil service, when merit exams were put in place for the civil service, African Americans did astonishingly well. And it was the one area in American life where talented, educated, able African Americans could compete in a colorblind contest for jobs. Mm-hmm. And they were very successful in this. And this was Wilson put an end to this. So the thing got uglier and uglier, and it really wasn't until Adolf Hitler taught us a lesson about the evils of racism that a generation came along that said this had to end. Mm-hmm. People like Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon, and the man I think was the greatest American president of the 20th century, Harry Truman, who courageously took this on in the late 40s.
And integrated the armed forces.
Yeah,
certainly.
That's right.
But I guess
there's an interesting story about that.
Well, okay, a quick story if we could, yeah.
Yeah, in Korea, they were so hard up for people that the integration of the armed forces actually took place before it was ordered by the president, de facto on the ground in Korea. There's young scholars just done a book on this.
I guess the point I'm really bringing up is that there are those who would certainly cite that as the very example of what you're talking about. So to a certain extent, is not soft despotism in the eye of the beholder?
I don't think so, because, look, what I'm talking about is minute control of people's lives, in which you find that you can't do this, you can't do that.
I can't have colored water fountains. I can't have colored restrooms. I mean, I'm just simply saying, again, eye of the beholder. Certainly, I have no question where I come down on that.
Those are public facilities. Yeah. What goes on in your own home is another matter.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a valid point, but again, I think you will have to parse in this direction, because I'm sure there will be people who will take the central thesis of your book and probably apply it in ways that of which you wouldn't approve.
Right, although there's plenty enough in the book to make it clear that I wouldn't approve of
No,
that.
Exactly, and I'm certainly not suggesting that you would. What would you suggest that we could do to turn this around? I mean, we live in a very complicated era. It's hard to believe we could become a great deal more federal in a society as complicated as ours with as many responsibilities as we have.
I think we easily could. Let me take one example. I don't think there's any reason for the federal government to have the slightest involvement in education. The people who care about the welfare of students most are their parents. And education was always something that was left to localities. And I think it should be returned entirely to localities. This is something that school boards elected by citizens in localities, largely made up of the parents of current or former students in those schools, can handle. They do not need to have things minutely spelled out from the all-wise people in Washington, D.C., who often introduce crazy ideas into the schools that get in the way of people learning to write and learning arithmetic and so forth. Nothing good has come from the federal involvement in local education, and there's no compelling reason whatsoever for the federal government to be involved in that.
Suffice it to say that the book Soft Despotism, Democracy's Drift is a serious re-examination of where we are going and what should be the standards by which we determine that course. And a copy of this, I think, honestly, should be sent to every leader of the Congress and, frankly, this administration. It might make a few of them think. Professor Paul Ray, our guest, will be back here at Westwood One. And welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. And on the web, you will find us at jimbotalk.net. You may not be aware of the fact that AmeriCorps Week is underway from May 9th through the 16th, and it is a look at the whole notion of volunteerism around the country. It is certainly a celebration of local heroes and national pride, and in a country blessed with boundless natural resources, we perhaps lead the world in the number one resource, our citizenry. You can learn more about this, by the way, at AmeriCorps.gov, AmeriCorps.gov. Established in 1993, 16 years it's been now, as a way for Americans, particularly the young, to give back to their communities and to their country. We're joined by the Director of Volunteer Maryland, which partners nonprofit organizations in the state with citizens who dedicate a year of their lives to national service in AmeriCorps. Barbara Reynolds is with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a bit more, if you would, about this whole program. We'll start, I guess, with AmeriCorps Week and work our way back to AmeriCorps itself.
Sure, absolutely happy to. First of all, happy National AmeriCorps Week. This is the third observance of a national recognition event. What we're doing this week is really trying to shine the spotlight on all of the wonderful adults, as you said, a lot of them young adults who are serving their country around the United States. I have the privilege of working in Maryland with a number of AmeriCorps members who are doing all different kinds of service. The week includes a number of service projects around the country as well as actual recognition events. I know in Maryland we had a wonderful conference on Tuesday put on by our governor's office. We also had a number of our AmeriCorps members and staff participate in a playground build in Baltimore City. So around the country there are different kinds of events, just as I said, to really shine the spotlight on folks. We're also trying to take this as an opportunity to say thank you to all of the nonprofit organizations, the churches, the businesses, really all of the community partners that make our service possible. It's certainly the citizenry, as you said at the beginning, but also it's the support of the community around these individuals who are serving their countries.
Are we volunteering as we once did? Sometimes you have to wonder if the old virtues and volunteerism would have to be one of those are still extant. Do we still do this?
We do. I think that's a really that's an interesting question and a fun discussion to have. Because we have been studying volunteerism now for so many decades, we have a really good idea, definitely here in the U.S., and we're seeing it more and more around the world, that Americans do volunteer and continue to volunteer even in times that are tough economically, like right now. In fact, overwhelmingly what we're seeing in Maryland is that while finances are getting tighter, of course, for everyone, and that includes nonprofits, people are still coming out to volunteer. They're still bringing out their families. They're coming out on weekends. They're still giving their time, which is, of course, even more important, I think, right now.
Well, it is obviously important. You tend to think in hard times that people perhaps become a little more me-centered just because we have certain basic things that have to be attended to, not always just I, me. Sometimes my family, for example. I'm the breadwinner or this sort of thing. And therefore, things of this nature aimed outward at the community as a whole tend to be put on the very back burner.
Yes, I think there's a certain instinct. I agree absolutely with that. And interestingly, though, in the work that I do and the work that I see and support our AmeriCorps members doing, we really continue to see people's generosity even in these really tough times. I think there's something in our DNA as humans. I think we do want to connect with each other, and when things are tough, that sense of connection is still there. And it's something that really propels AmeriCorps. I mean, just the fact that these individuals are dedicating a whole year of their lives for very tiny, a very tiny living stipend, and working in some of the toughest communities that we have in this country. And year after year, we're seeing more and more people applying for these positions. So I think that's really a demonstration of how we are dedicated to service even in really tough times.
It sounds like a domestic Peace Corps. Would that be a fair description?
It would, actually. We've used that as a description a lot, and over the years I think the Peace Corps has come to grips with it, with us saying that. What we have in common certainly is the notion of folks giving themselves full-time to service. We do have the great honor to work, for the most part, our AmeriCorps members are serving in the communities where they come from. They tend to be working right alongside people they grew up with or that they went to school with or, that their families know. In some cases, people do move around, like the Peace Corps. They get to go to a different part of the country. We've had folks from Maryland head up to Alaska to serve as vistas. We've had folks from California come over to Baltimore and work with us. So there's a little bit of that travel as well. But the sense of giving yourself up full-time for service, that is for sure very much an alignment between the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps.
Barbara Reynolds is Director of Volunteer Maryland, and we're talking about this week that we are observing right now, National AmeriCorps Week, and it is May the 9th through the 16th. And we'll take a look at some of what these specific volunteer opportunities may be. Perhaps we have nudged the altruistic within you, and if so, we'll tell you how you can apply that when we come back. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. We're talking here tonight about volunteerism, about AmeriCorps, about this week, National AmeriCorps Week, the 9th through the 16th, with the Director of Volunteer Maryland, Barbara Reynolds. Let's say that somebody out there says, I'd like to do this kind of thing. I have the time and the resources. I can afford to do this. I'm serious about it. So if I go to AmeriCorps.gov and I sign up, what am I really getting myself into here?
Sure, that's a great question, and of course, my first response to that would be, yay! I'm very excited that you would be thinking about this and taking the time. There's a really wonderful online recruitment website. It is at AmeriCorps.gov that you mentioned before. Very, very easy to navigate. There's an online application, and folks who want to find out about any projects, all AmeriCorps projects that are registered on that website. There's simple sort criteria. You can check out part-time opportunities, full-time opportunities. There are AmeriCorps positions that last for a year. There are also shorter-term AmeriCorps positions that are just for the summer or for a semester of school. You can sort by your location. You can also sort by the kind of project that you might be interested in. AmeriCorps actually has 5 different national priority issue areas. And so if you're interested in environmental projects, you can go onto the website and sort by those. I know in Maryland we have a wonderful conservation corps that helps protect the Chesapeake Bay. That's one example of an environmental project. We also have education programs, or the education issue area, public safety, human needs, and then homeland security as well. So you can sort through all of that. And as I said, their website has a really nice function that'll just easily take you to the different projects. And then through that one online application, you can electronically apply to as many projects as you want. And, depending on your time and your energy, from there you would have conversations with the individual projects about their requirements, their timelines, and all that stuff.
What would be a typical project?
Sorry.
What would be a typical project?
A typical project is hard to say. There's a tremendous amount of diversity. We're talking about 75,000 individuals who are serving in AmeriCorps and about 3,000 different programs. So there is no real typical. I can tell you there's kind of an indoor typical maybe and an outdoor, but even that's going to be a little tough to characterize. The outdoor folks, I think, are on some level really the face of AmeriCorps. It's often the face I think you think of when you hear the term Peace Corps or the Civilian Conservation Corps from back in President Roosevelt's time. These are the individuals who are outdoors, blazing trails, maintaining public lands, as I said, protecting our Chesapeake Bay. So that's kind of a typical outdoor AmeriCorps project. The indoor projects can tend to be things, again, very familiar, like tutoring youth or working with senior citizens, providing services to shelters or to meal programs that serve low-income individuals. I know in our program, again, at Volunteer Maryland, all of our AmeriCorps members are serving, all of our Volunteer Maryland coordinators are serving in nonprofits as volunteer coordinators. So they themselves are responsible for going out and recruiting tutors and recruiting mentors, recruiting folks to help work in environmental projects. So I wish there were a typical position. I think that's one of for me, it's always been one of the real joys of AmeriCorps is that it's so diverse. But I think if you're new to it, it can be a little tough to get your mind around.
Now, I'm pretty sure that anybody who enters the Peace Corps has to undergo a considerable amount of training, and of course, a lot of that is cultural sensitivity and mores and customs of very different societies. It might not be quite so necessary in this country, but if you, in fact, volunteer for AmeriCorps, do you undergo a boot camp of volunteerism, or do they just say, okay, your skills are A, B, and C, and you're going to Pittsburgh or what have you?
Yep. There's definitely an orientation and training for new AmeriCorps members. The way that orientation and training looks depends on the specific project. So obviously those outdoor AmeriCorps members I mentioned before have a lot more physical training, more of a physical boot camp that they would go through before they got deployed to their positions. Our indoor AmeriCorps program members will also go through training, just as you said, actually, to learn how to work in the nonprofit culture that they're going into, or into a school or a faith-based organization. In our program, we pull our AmeriCorps members into training for about 11 days before they get deployed. We do a number of different kinds of training content with them. The bulk of it really is around, it is what you said, it's volunteerism boot camp. It's how to be an effective volunteer manager, how to really work effectively with different communities. So the training is extensive and definitely meant to equip the AmeriCorps members with everything they need.
Would I tend to go?
Motivation.
Would I tend to go? I was going to say, would I tend to go a long distance? Let's say I live in, say, Rockville, Maryland, one of the suburbs of Washington. Might I be assigned to Maryland's Eastern Shore, or would I wind up in Alaska? I mean, or do you have a choice in that sort of thing?
Sure. Oh, no, you have the absolute choice. It's you as a person who is interested in AmeriCorps. The options are really your buffet. You decide. There are service opportunities. There are wonderful service opportunities on the Eastern Shore and in Alaska as well. But the choice for the program that you want to go into, that you're interested in going into, is entirely up to you. And as I said, we've worked with folks who've literally stepped out of their front door of the home they grew up in, walked down the street, and then served their community. As an AmeriCorps member, it's been that local. And then we've also worked with folks who have literally traveled up to Alaska or traveled from Alaska to come to Baltimore. So it's entirely the individual's choice.
All right, let's say that we look at it from the standpoint of the projects. I know not only do Americans volunteer to serve in the Peace Corps, to maintain that analogy, but there are countries that say, hey, we had great success with that last batch of Peace Corps volunteers. Send us some more. Are there projects within the country who come to AmeriCorps and say, we'd like some volunteers?
Yeah, absolutely. That's again.
And if you're one of those, if you're one of those, would you just contact AmeriCorps? And how would you qualify? I mean, what types of organizations could in fact receive these volunteers?
Sure. It has to be a 501c3, a nonprofit organization, or a government organization. That's one of the eligibility criteria. It also has to be an organization that needs the kind of human or environmental help that AmeriCorps provides, and that would be the kind of help that falls into those issue areas I mentioned before. So if you're a nonprofit that serves a particular human need like housing or meal delivery, then your institution, your organization might be a good placement for AmeriCorps. So if that is the case and you're interested in finding out, that website you mentioned before as well is also a good place to go, the AmeriCorps.gov. There's a link on that website for organizations. And again, fairly easily, I think, it takes you through how to find out what projects are in your state, in your city, in your community, and then how to request AmeriCorps assistance from those projects. I know Volunteer Maryland is listed on there because every year we have to recruit new nonprofit partners for our AmeriCorps members, and that's one of the ways that we use to do it.
I would assume that there is something akin to Volunteer Maryland in the other states as well?
There's not, actually. We are a rare bird, and I think, as far as I know, the only AmeriCorps program that does the type of volunteer management exclusively. So we've often joked about wanting to clone ourselves, and many people have volunteered to start Volunteer Hawaii, but sadly we have not been able to make that happen yet.
So, in other words, in lots of states there's not that much active participation at the state and local level? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
No. Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. It just looks different. The way Volunteer Maryland was set up under Governor Schaefer many years ago is just a unique program model, the way that we operate. Volunteerism and certainly civic engagement through AmeriCorps is pervasive in every corner of the country. There are, as I said, about 3,000 different AmeriCorps programs working with about 75,000 individuals, and Volunteer Maryland is just one of those programs.
More to come, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. And we're talking about AmeriCorps, and Barbara Reynolds is Director of Volunteer Maryland. Perhaps something out there may have reached out to you and said, I need to do something about this. We'll have more. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. We are talking with Barbara Reynolds, Director of Volunteer of Maryland, and we're doing so as regards to AmeriCorps Week, which is underway the 9th through the 16th. How would you sum up the spirit of volunteerism right now? Are people doing so unconditionally? Are they demanding some kind of recompense? I mean, I might be willing to do all kinds of things, but I certainly couldn't let my family go without food on the table and the bills paid. What kind of compensation do you provide, and is that adequate to really get people volunteering?
Sure. Well, I think there are a couple of answers. The first question, the compensation for the AmeriCorps members, definitely it's not a lot of money. I mean, that's one thing. The 75,000 individuals who do this every year are doing it because they have tremendous hearts. And also, as we've talked about, they have the circumstances in their lives that make this possible. The actual stipend, the living stipend for AmeriCorps members varies, again, depending on program. For our AmeriCorps program for full-time members, it's $13,000 for the year. That's $13,000, and that's it. They do receive health care coverage for the year that they serve. They also receive at the end of their year an education grant. Right now, it's about $4,700. And that's money that they can use to either put towards a student loan that they might have or to pay for future tuition. Mm-hmm. So in terms of compensation, it's not a lot of cash. It really, the AmeriCorps service is all about the heart, and that's one of the reasons why we like to take this week, and we need to take this week every year to really recognize that service.
You know, if the government really wanted to jumpstart this, they could allow students to forgive part of their student loans in exchange for a year in AmeriCorps. Your volunteerism would jump 200% overnight.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's the whole new public service loan forgiveness program, and I think we're still trying to come to grips with whether or not that program will count AmeriCorps time. So that's definitely something I agree completely. If there's a way that we could get, a year or two of AmeriCorps service to chop off some of that student loan debt, that would be huge. I would say on the other side of the question there, the compensation for people who are just volunteering in their communities locally, who are not serving as AmeriCorps members, just like the AmeriCorps members, I think people volunteer because they have huge hearts, but they also do volunteer for specific needs that they have for themselves. I mean, we see volunteers who want to learn a particular skill, so they'll volunteer at an agency so they can get a kind of training that's going to help them in their lives. Or they might be looking for a particular social experience. So again, they'll volunteer, to be with a particular team or a group of people because they want that social experience. I think that there's a real goodness, and it's absolutely okay for it to be a win-win situation, where the volunteer is getting something for him or herself as well.
Who tend to do this? Do you get a lot of retired people, a lot of very young? I would think people in their prime earning years would be less likely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, overall, in our program, interestingly, our average age is 35. So we really we're getting the right out of college crowd. That's one group, about a third of our group. We are getting the retired or recently retired folks. That's another third. And then the other third for our program is that middle-aged folks, my people, my generation, who are in the prime earning years. And what we see in that group is that it's folks who've maybe started down one career path but have decided that they would like to try another. And often that other path that they're looking at is social work or teaching or some aspect of the nonprofit world.
All right, we're going to wrap on that note. Stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Again, if you are curious, if we have piqued your interest, you should go to the website AmeriCorps.gov, AmeriCorps.gov. Our guest is Barbara Reynolds of Volunteer Maryland. This is Westwood One. Well, goodness gracious sakes alive, and thank you for being with us here on the Jim Bohannon Show at Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and on the web, there we are at jimbotalk.net. Well, at JimboTalk.net. We have our poll, and we always like to have people just click on there, log on, click over there, and pick your various options, and let us know what you think in an unscientific little poll that we do. Last week, we asked you about whether or not there was an over-media hype of the flu outbreak, and asked you how closely you've been touched with the virus. 1% said you or an immediate family member got it. 1% knew somebody who got it. 7% had workplace or school closed. 91% unaffected. All right, so this week, many employers have had to take drastic steps to stay in business. We're curious, in what way have you been most affected? Your choices are: I lost my job, or I took a cut in pay, benefits, or hours, including going from full to part-time, or I have had my workload dramatically increase with no increase in pay, which of the various options ain't the worst of the lot, or I've been fortunate my working conditions have not changed. Just go to JimboTalk.net. Click on that poll. And coming up, we're going to be getting out and about and doing a few things that we look forward to doing from time to time. Coming up on June the 1st, we'll be in Chicago, the Radio Hall of Fame Board of Directors meeting. I'm not only a member of the hall, but I'm also the Hair Club president, and serving on their board now, so that'll be fun. We'll have picked the nominees for next year's induction, or this year's, actually next November's induction, and we'll let you know who they are and how you can vote as that information becomes available. We'll take part in the New Media Seminar in New York City, June the 5th and the 6th, Friday and Saturday. Always looking forward to that. Sean Hannity plays a big role in that. Neil Bortz will probably be there, and a host of various talk show hosts. And Michael Harrison of Talkers Magazine does such a great job in putting that together. All righty. We have some odds and ends in the news that we like to pass along to you, just because we like to pique your curiosity. For about an hour this past week, the Missouri State Capitol and the governor's mansion were without power after a snake crawled into an underground cable tunnel. Power was restored. The snake was not. Well, this sort of thing happens, I guess. Let's see here. Visitor to the Macerata, Italy hospital got a surprise when he bit into a cafeteria cheese and tomato sandwich and tasted something meaty. Meaty? Well, turns out he'd bitten into a lizard. The good news, the cafeteria isn't charging him extra. Yeah, he's suing. Of course, you know he's suing. In Findlay, Ohio, Tyler Frost has been suspended from Heritage Christian High School for attending the prom at Findlay High School. Tyler's girlfriend goes to Findlay High. But no matter, Tyler gets an incomplete on all remaining assignments, and although he does get his diploma, he'll be banned from graduation ceremonies for breaking Heritage Christian rules about hand-holding, rock music, and dancing. Heaven forbid. You might want to think about changing schools, frankly, Tyler, in my humble opinion. Anyway, for what it's worth. In Detroit, County Judge Wade McCree has an unusual but often appropriate sentence for deadbeat dads. Watching episodes of Maury. That's the sentence. They got to watch Maury Povich. In Norway, drunk driving fines are based on one's income and personal wealth, so even though he only drove 400 yards, this man, worth an estimated $37 million, will have to pay a fine of $109,000. Whoa! For driving 400 yards drunk. We could figure out that, I guess, per inch, but although, that seems highly exorbitant, but I must say that I find a lot of merit in the notion of fines that reflect your ability to pay. I mean, if somebody sticks me with a $500 fine, I would not be happy about it, but I could pay it. For some people, $500 might as well be $1 million. And certainly if you're Ross Perot or Jay Rockefeller, a fine of $500,000 wouldn't be that big a deal. There is something, since fines are supposed to deter behavior, there is something to be said, I believe, about fines that, at least in part, reflect one's ability to pay. $109,000 for drunk driving is a little steep. Joe Danette of Central Virginia got laid off by his home building company back in January. He's been out of work ever since. However, Joe is not too worried about that right now after picking up $75.6 million in the Mega Millions lottery. Out of work? Hey, hurt me. Coming up on the Bohannon Show on this coming Monday evening, Chris Matthews of MSNBC, the host of Hardball, will be here to talk about the Hardball Handbook. He'll join us in studio, and we'll look forward. Always good to see Chris. I enjoy talking to him. Coming up on Tuesday night, Amy Grant is going to be with us in the first hour of the program. One of the great singers of our time. I've enjoyed her very much. Craig Shoemaker, the comedian, not sure exactly when he's going to be here. We have him down tentatively for Thursday, May the 21st in our second hour. That may change, but we will have Craig Shoemaker on this program. Very funny man. If you don't know Craig, he's the guy who does the Love Master routine. Funny, funny dude. All right. On Friday, May the 22nd, Annabelle Gurwitch will be rejoining us. A lady who wrote about getting fired. We'll look forward to that. So just a few of the folks that are coming up here on the Bohannon Show in the next few days, hereabouts. We'll take a quick break, and we've got more to come on the Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. When we come back, a notion about crime and punishment after these messages. All right, welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Oh, the staff figured it out. If you drive 400 yards drunk and you're fined $109,000, that comes to $7.57 an inch. Okay. On the other hand, my guess is that even a person worth $37 million will think twice about driving drunk again. So there is a deterrent effect to consider there. Well, as regards the issue of crime and punishment, the Supreme Court is taking up a very serious question. As Barry Bagnatto reports, should juveniles serve life sentences without parole for really heinous crimes?
A teenager just shy of 17 brutally murdered Jennifer Bishop Jenkins' sister and brother-in-law and their unborn child. It prompted her to help found a victims group that opposes an outright ban on juvenile sentences of life without parole.
If you've got a 17-year-old who's killed multiple people in a pre-planned, calculated fashion, he should be serving that life sentence.
David Fauti at Human Rights Watch says the U.S. is the only country in the world that essentially sentences juveniles to die in prison.
Children are different from adults. This is something that the U.S. Supreme Court recognized just 4 years ago when it ruled that children cannot be subjected to the death penalty.
I'm Barry Bagnatto in Washington.
Interesting thoughts there. Just what is the extent of punishment that we should send to people who are defined as juveniles? You know, if the crime is nasty enough, you have to wonder the extent to which we indulge in the fantasy of trying to rehabilitate people. To what extent are we really able to do that? I'm not sure that we've got that down to a science. If you really had something you could clamp on people's heads and you threw a switch and the little wheels turned and the lights blinked and people came out and they have absolutely changed their ways, well then, hey, no questions asked. But in the case of something like this, and the person is 17, barely a juvenile. So now we're into the area of drawing lines, arbitrary lines, but necessary lines, along what is obviously a continuum. I mean, people, of course, don't automatically, at the age of 18, suddenly acquire the wisdom to vote, but they don't have yet the wisdom to drink for 3 years. Of course, the year before, I think it's 17, they automatically suddenly acquired the maturity to serve in the military. And the year before that, they were suddenly automatically wise enough to drive a vehicle. Society clearly has to draw certain lines. I understand that, even though, of course, the reality is that there are some kids that are probably mentally mature enough at the age of 11 to drive a car, and some of them may be physically mature enough they could pull it off. Other people who are 41 and shouldn't be allowed anywhere behind the wheel of a car. So the age requirements are obviously arbitrary. Society has to do that. You just can't test everybody on whether or not they can drive at a certain age. There have to be certain lines drawn. But in the case of lines drawn as regards heinous crimes, now in this case that Barry Bagnetto reported about, the 17-year-old, we wouldn't be talking about this, wouldn't even blink an eye about this if the person was 27 or 37. This is an entirely age-related thing. Are we throwing away a life that has potential? And do we define potential merely as how many years the actuarial tables say they will probably live? Or is it potential based on what they have shown so far of their willingness and ability to make out of their lives? 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. Should juveniles serve life sentences without parole for heinous crimes? We've already seen our reluctance to use capital punishment in the case of the young. This would seem, in some cases, to be the only alternative. Or are we just to automatically say, well, kids will be kids? It's a little tough, I think, to go along with that. For whatever reason, kids grow up a lot sooner these days. Kids achieve sexual maturity a lot earlier. Girls have the onset of their period now many years younger than just a generation ago. Whether that's something dietary or what, I'm not really sure, but it is a demonstrable fact. Young boys, the same thing. Whether it is permissive societies or just exactly what's at work here, the actions of the young also have tended to move forward beyond what once would have been considered likely to occur at a given age. There was a time when such an action by a 17-year-old would have been a nationwide scandal. Today we shrug our shoulders. Another kid committed a heinous murder. I personally have to think that life sentences without parole, if you have already thrown out the notion of the death penalty, is the only option. Society has to be protected, first and foremost. If you commit such crimes, then you automatically enter the realm of the first consideration being whether or not we can be protected from you. I am, at this point, a lot less concerned about your potential. My guess is that you're probably not going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The odds are you will probably not find a cure for cancer. I don't believe we are wasting a whole heck of a lot of potential here to begin with. At best, we might hope that you could be a productive citizen. 1-866-50-JIMBO on the Bohannon Show. Robert in Kenton, Tennessee, your thoughts?
Yes, sir. I actually, there was, I believe a few years ago, there was a 12 or 13-year-old boy who did some wrestling moves that killed a 5-year-old girl, and apparently during all that, he did it repeatedly, even after she was dead, and I believe even he was sentenced to life in prison, and a girl that I was dating at the time, we got in quite an argument over that because she believed that it was just, and you know,
Well, that was a little different, if I'm not mistaken. For one thing, I think wasn't the kid somewhat retarded, or whatever is the politically correct term these days, and somewhat younger, and had some problem understanding that what he had done?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And you know, that's kind of where I think where it needs to be. You know, if you know they see a psychiatrist or whatever professional, and they're deemed completely mature and know what they're doing and things of that nature. You know, obviously they knew what they were doing, whether it be an anger issue or whatever. You know, they were completely aware of the crime they were committing. However, if there's some kind of slowness and you know, just a complete disconnect from reality, then I think it's more of maybe a reform issue that we need to look at rather than just, you know, throw them in a jail cell and let them rot away.
Well, in your circumstance that you brought up here, I could see what you're talking about. I'm not sure I would automatically go along with you, but I agree that a case-by-case judgment would have to be made. In the case of the young man in question, I recall having ambivalent thoughts about that. In this particular case, though, I mean, you said in this case it would be obvious, but it isn't obvious, obviously, to a lot of people out there. There are any number of people who seems to think that this particular 17-year-old, I mean, it's a court battle, and it got to the Supreme Court, so there are people on the other side of the question who seem to think that this kind of heinous murder by somebody who knew exactly what he was doing should still raise the question of whether or not we lock him up and throw away the key. So to me, I don't think it's any question either. But there are those who feel that way. There are those who would subject the rest of us to danger over some kind of short-sighted sense of, well, frankly, desperately seeking moral superiority. It's too bad that punks like this, if in fact they are not incarcerated forever, if upon release they can't be moved next door to the people who got them out. Now we would be talking some justice. I would watch that and, frankly, enjoy it.
Absolutely, and you know, I think sometimes, like you were talking about with numbers are arbitrary. You know, it's more of a maturity level, as you said. You know, there are kids that graduate high school at 14. You know, and obviously that person is more mentally capable of handling, you know, certain things than even his own classmates at the same age. You know, so you can't go by numbers. You can't let numbers get you soft and make you go, oh, you know, you got to really stop and look at, okay, what kind of person is this, regardless of their age.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I really do, Robert. I think good thoughts there. Let's go to Laura in Reading, Pennsylvania. Good evening.
Oh, my, that was so quick.
Well, I'm glad we got you on.
I just happened to pick up the radio because the Phillies game lasted until like 11:30. It was 12 innings, and then your show came on. I mean, I was just thinking as an alternative to death, but even those death sentences, by the time they do it, they're, you know, it lasts like 10 years or 20 years.
Well, the appeals process, that's a whole different topic, but the whole notion that there's the inherent lengthy time leading up to the death penalty, no, there's nothing inherent about that. We have chosen to make it an appeals process that has nothing to do with the merits of the case or the crime. We have just made it into a legal marathon run that does nothing but fatten the pockets of lawyers and very possibly raise the real question of whether or not sitting that long on death row is cruel and unusual punishment. Yeah, I mean, once you've determined the case, there's no point in dragging it out forever. If a person meets the standards for capital punishment, he was convicted of that, and he was given that as a sentence, then execute the SOB.
I was
in my humble
lobotomies.
Lobotomy?
Yeah, they could do lobotomies.
Well,
they used to do with the mental patients.
They did used to do that, actually, which I think does go into the realm of genuine cruel and unusual punishment. Lobotomies, actually, to be really honest, are not all that they were cracked up to be. They didn't cure anything, certainly in terms of mental health. It simply wound up mutilating people. I'd have to kind of, I think, leave lobotomies out of my equation, honestly, Laura. But, hey, in any event, we'll see what the court has to say about this. I'll be very curious to see just exactly where they go with this. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626 on the Jim Bohannon Show. And coming up, just a few minutes, we'll take our look at what's in the world of Mighty John's Money Music Minute. Tell you what's coming up on Face the Nation this Sunday morning, and a very special interview. Del Curry. If you've not heard of him before, then I hope that you will remember him now. A very talented fellow. All right? More to come. This is the Jim Bohannon Show. We come to you weeknights here at Westwood One. Coming up this Sunday morning on CBS News' Face the Nation with Chief CBS Washington News correspondent Bob Schieffer. A look at military tribunals, detainee photos, and interrogation memos. Guests will include the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, Anthony Romero, and Republican Congressman Peter King of New York, the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee. Plus, there'll be a roundtable on the Supreme Court. All coming up on Face the Nation on this Sunday morning. Interesting story here I found. You're sitting there at home like Mark and Zoe Ryder of Britain when a cow breaks into your backyard and jumps in your swimming pool. Don't you hate when that happens? Yeah, me too. Well, anyway, Mark tried a little, here cow, but that didn't do any good. And finally, an emergency crew was called. By then, the cow had walked out of the shallow end of the pool by itself. Oh, and no cows were harmed in the making of this story. We thought that you should know that. In Tyler, Texas, people in a mobile home park complained about low water pressure. A check revealed an unauthorized hose which led into nearby woods and right to over 2,300 marijuana plants. How do you make a pot bust in Tyler, Texas? Why, you just go with the flow, obviously. All righty. More to come on the Jim Bohannon Show. Leading off right now with just a tad early tonight, our check-in with Mighty John Marshall and his Money Music Minute.
Hi, everyone. This is Mighty John, the record guy, with a Money Music Minute. During their first appearance in the U.S. on The Ed Sullivan Show, the Rolling Stones sang "Time is on My Side," after which Sullivan declared he would never have them back. Ratings soon changed his mind. What's a copy of "Time is on My Side" worth today? The answer right after this.
And once again, Mighty John Marshall.
"Time is on My Side" was the Rolling Stones' first top 10 hit in the U.S. It exemplified the slow, bluesy sound of many hits to follow. Released on London Records in 1964, the 45 with its picture sleeve is currently worth up to $200. You can find the value of any record at moneymusic.com.
That's a pity to see when the land of the free turned out to be nothing but a free for all. If you got big dough, you're freer than most, cause your freedom goes up with the size of your bag of roll. Now you can buy a judge or a bribe or a thug or a bomb or a shredding machine. You can buy your way through into known to any ticket or TV screen. It's a money disease, a thing called greed. And if you don't know, you need the money most in Moneyland. Oh, and it's so funny if you got the money in Moneyland.
Now that is a great sound, and it is a sound you'll be hearing a great deal coming up on something called Dell Fest. That is Memorial Day weekend, the 22nd to the 24th, at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds in Cumberland, Maryland. Attention all of you listening to AM 1270 WCBC in Cumberland. And we are talking right now with actually the McCoury portion of the Del McCoury Band, and that would be Del, the father and guitarist, and also son Ronnie on mandolin and Rob on banjo. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us.
Great to be here. Yeah.
What is Del Fest, Del?
That is a festival.
This is sort of like a Roots Woodstock. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, you're probably kind of right about that. I swear. We've got like a mixture of music, you know. We've got bluegrass.
Right.
Naturally, we've got some of the hardcore bluegrass bands there, and also jam bands, and these boys will have to help me with some of the other ones that we've got. It's a mixture of blues. There's blues, jazz, whatever. We've got it.
Very eclectic, Jim. Very eclectic.
Now, we are talking here, I gather, about, Ronnie, about a resurgence in the love of bluegrass and all of the roots music, which is to say not something artificial that was thought up in some highfalutin record producer's office and amplified by 1,000 amplifiers. This is the stuff that real people play.
That's right. You're absolutely right, Jim. Yeah, this is something that people can sit on their back porch and play, but it's a little more refined than that, though, the musicians that are there.
Well, I must say that I have. You guys are really good. I mean, we should probably go over some of the accolades here. That your songs, Adele, has written, have been recorded by Dierks Bentley, Alison Krauss, Union Station, countless bluegrass bands. You've been a Grand Ole Opry member since '03, is that right? No?
'03, yeah.
That is
I had to wait a long time.
You are your band. You are the most awarded act in the history of bluegrass. That's what I'm told.
What they tell me? Yeah. You know, sometimes you don't hear right things.
That's pretty impressive. You know, I gotta really ask you, Rob, have you ever thought about just selling out and just going really commercial? I mean,
I'm cut out for that. I enjoy playing this music that we play together. You know, it is a, you know. It's bluegrass, you know. Some folks kind of make fun of bluegrass, but it's very refined. When you hear good bluegrass, it's hard to play.
It's very hard to play, and it requires
it's a pleasure to play when it's right.
Great ability. Banjo. The people always make. My father played banjo, and I know about people always making jokes about banjo. Would you care to defend the banjo here and now?
The people that make fun of the banjo, they just have no idea how hard it is to play one. It's the hardest instrument there is to play. Everybody knows that.
I think it is. I mean, although, of course, I know one of those those jokes. You know, what's the best sound you can make off a banjo? When it goes clunk at the bottom of a dumpster. I'm sure you've heard that one. Okay, yeah. The mandolin. Ronnie, what exactly is a mandolin? It looks like kind of like an anorexic little guitar in a way. What exactly is a mandolin?
Yeah, I've heard that before too, Jim. It, I guess it originated in Europe, and it's basically it's based after the violin. It's the same tuning, and
but you pluck it instead of bowing.
Exactly.
I see.
And it's probably older than the violin. It's probably from the lute family, which is. Yeah.
Well, that's because you got Alan Bartram over here on the bass, and they do both with the bass. They pluck the bass, they pick the bass, boom, 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 or they can in the big orchestra string the bass. I wonder how come that, for example, has anyone ever tried to string the guitar that you know of, Del?
Bow.
Exactly, a boa. You know, it could be done. I suppose.
Tried it. It didn't work.
Didn't work out too well.
He'd have to have a strong bow.
I reckon you would.
Yeah.
Del, all these years on the road, does it ever get old?
Not really. No, probably the hardest part is the traveling, but I think it takes a certain person to be a traveling musician or a road musician. It's not cut out for everybody. Yeah. But I always liked the road. I like to travel, and so the combination of playing music and traveling, they kind of go together.
Well, he's a guitar picking, bluegrass singing, never grow up boy. It says so.
Yeah.
Right here on the cover of a wonderful collection here of CDs celebrating 50 years of Del McCoury. That's very impressive. How does one get a... There are 5 discs on here. My goodness. And
yeah, it goes back
50 songs.
Yeah, I did like 10 from the 60s that I used to play with Bill Monroe way back, and I did a couple songs that I did on the road shows with him. I sang solo, and so we did 10 from that, and then 10 from the 70s, right on up till each decade.
You tend to think of this music as being the venerable music of yesteryear, but in point of fact, people like you are still writing today. Bluegrass is historic, to be sure, but it's also very alive and vibrant. I mean,
it is. Yeah. A lot of writers in Nashville. A lot of songwriters. We get a lot of our material from the writers in Nashville because if they find out you're going to do a record, man, they just flock, and bring songs, which is natural, A songwriter likes for his songs to be sung on the road, and recorded, and that's great.
And I note here, if you go to Delfest, DELFEST.com, why, it tells all about this festival that's coming up, which is, again, May 22nd to the 24th. That is the Memorial Day weekend, Friday through Sunday, at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds in Cumberland, Maryland. Beautiful part of the state, by the way, up in the mountain area there.
Really?
And also, there is a place here that says store. You click on that, and I guess you can get a copy, right, of the 5 CD set here.
Yes, you can.
Absolutely.
You sure can.
I'm curious about the boys here, Rob and Ronnie. Sometimes kids rebel. Their father can do the most wonderful thing in the world, but the kid wants no part of it. Were you encouraged heavily, or was it left up to you whether you were going to be bluegrass musicians?
Oh, it was left up to us. I mean, one thing that I can say, Dad never pushed us. I don't think he ever asked us to practice. And so,
I wish I had.
I heard you play. You practiced plenty. Okay.
But, it was, we saw how much fun he had on stage, probably, as kids, and we just had the want, I guess, to do it, It's kind of, we picked up different instruments, but, from what he played, but I guess it was just kind of out of necessity for one thing, but...
Yeah.
But we really enjoyed it,
So you all have your specialty instrument, of course. My guess is that every one of you can play at least one other, probably, and maybe more than that. It just sort of goes with the territory, right?
Yeah.
I don't like to hear me playing the fiddle.
Have you ever, like on April Fool's Day, just switched instruments? Probably not. No, people pay their money for their tickets.
That's right.
You don't need a trombone, do you? No.
Hey, we might. Yeah, we'll look into that.
I don't think so. Well, now, I'm curious, Rob, which is more enjoyable to you, a live performance with the reaction of the audience, but, of course, all the imperfections that automatically come, or the perfection you can get in the studio where you can record it 28 times to get it just perfect? Which is more satisfying to you as a musician or a performer?
I would rather be playing live.
Is that right?
I like playing in the studio, too. It's great. Everything's it's a controlled environment, you know. So, but on stage, you just never know what's going to happen, and it's more exciting, you know. And plus, you got the crowd and the reaction of the folks and all that, you know.
Well, things do happen on stage. There's no question about that. Do you recall, Del, over your 50 years as a professional musician? I know you've got memories galore. You remember the strangest, weirdest, and/or funniest thing, just whichever category comes to mind that you can recall happening on stage?
On stage?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what. Yeah, I could just recall something. My brother Jerry used to play in my band with me, you know, and we did duets together. He was a bass player, and you know, the bass has a fingerboard that comes down, and then where the from there down, I'm pointing now, and the folks out in Radio Land won't know what I'm
just
pointing
adjust the color tint on your radio.
True. Anyway, I broke a G string on the guitar, and at the same time, my brother broke his fingerboard off the bass. At the same time, we both were out of commission.
That would do it. That would do it. That's
and it fell on the floor. From what would it be, about a quarter of the fingerboard? About a quarter of it.
You must have been flicking away pretty hard there. That's a solid piece of wood there. My goodness. Well, that's about as bad as the time that I was marching in a marching band with my trombone and got too close to the drum majorettes, and one of them machine gunned that thing off my slide. Bing, 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 bing. The rest of the parade, I mean, I was stuck. I just pulled it up and held it there. I couldn't play anything but the notes on that one position. Now,
Jim, we did play a rock and roll festival called Bonnaroo.
Did you?
And it's a big festival. It's in Tennessee, and right in the front row was somebody that Dad didn't really recognize this, but it was a girl had a painted on shirt.
A painted, you know, some of those are pretty realistic. You can't realize, but about this time you're picking along and you realize that's skin. Now there, gentlemen, there is a test of musicianship. If you can remember two chords after that, I say that's a professional musician.
Yeah, Jason said we started playing real fast.
Yeah. That'll get your attention. Yeah. Yes, that's true. I went to Delfest, and all I didn't get was this lousy T-shirt. So, okay. But by the way, you can get all kinds of stuff. Like you can get T-shirts, you can get all kinds of stuff at the Delfest.com store here. Let's talk about something that I think is a serious thing, and it bothers me. Maybe there's less of it. I don't know. Maybe there's just as much. But that is music snobbery, Del. There are just a lot of people out there that just put their nose up in the air at the thought of bluegrass music. What would you say to people like that, other than the fact that they're missing a lot of very enjoyable time?
Yes, that's true. You know, all they have to do is listen. You know, I mean, just sit down and listen for a little while. You know, it's a great art form, but at the same time, you know, we've got fans and listeners that the whole spectrum. You know, like from doctors and lawyers down to farmers and just whatever.
That's
you know,
right.
And young people, old people, and we have a wide spectrum of fans, you know, really do. I think probably more than any music. I really think that.
I would think so. It really does. But there are probably, again, that goes back to the snobbery. There are probably closet bluegrass fans out there, you know. That by day, they sip their white wine.
And play banjos.
And at night, when nobody, when they've soundproofed the garage and they're out there picking up a storm. It's probably true. But now this celebrating 50 years of Del McCoury, 50 years, 50 songs, one legacy. How much of it is new stuff, Del? How much of it is the traditional older cuts that maybe have been reprocessed or whatever they do?
Well, they're all, every one of them, we recut them. In other words, the re-record restrictions were out on things that I had recorded years ago, you know, and so we re-recorded them in the studio. I think it was 35 of them. Then the last 15, we recorded ourselves in the last few years on our own label. So, you know, they're all, none of them are what would you say? They're all
re-releases or anything.
Yeah, there's no re-releases. They're all, except for the
15,
except for the 15, the later ones, you know, some of the, like in the 2000s, you know.
By the way, I have been informed of a listener discount. If you go to delfest.com, DELFEST.com, I can see that Del's eyebrows are rising here. He may not be aware of this, but I am told that when you order tickets, use the keyword Delfest for a discount. So you can go to delfest.com, and when you order tickets, use the keyword DELFest, DELFEST, for a discount. This is the second annual DELFest at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds in Cumberland, Maryland. And, of course, all of you who listen to WCBC AM 1270, well, it's right on your back step. And for the rest of you, a little travel may be in order, but it's not that difficult to reach, and a beautiful part of the country, I might add.
Really? It's really a beautiful place. The Allegheny County Fairgrounds are, you know.
Yeah.
You've been there, and it's got the Potomac River going around that side, and then that's West Virginia right there. You can look at it. It's straight up.
Yeah, oh, and it is straight up. Actually, if West Virginia were actually put under a good flat iron, it would be the size of Texas.
Yeah, at least that
people
big.
People don't realize that. Well, gentlemen, we are flat out of time, but I want to thank you very, very much. And again, I urge everyone to go to the website, delfest.com, DELFEST.com. You can learn all about this wonderful new CD package they've got out of 5 CDs celebrating 50 years of Del McCoury. You can get tickets to go see Del Fest, which again is going to be May 22nd to the 24th at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds in Cumberland, Maryland, and there is a listener discount. You go to delfest.com. When you order tickets, use keyword DELFEST for a discount. Gentlemen, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for having us in here.
Great guys. We do appreciate their presence. We'll take a quick break. We have got more to come here on the Jim Bohannon Show. Stay with us.
Excuse me, madam. You're standing still in a no parking zone. If you don't get a move on that body, I'll be forced to give you a ticket. So,
Mercy! The International Parking Institute begins its convention in Denver this Sunday.
We have a conference that is full of seminars and workshops. A big part of it is a trade show where we'll bring in close to 200 exhibitors.
For about 1,600 conventioneers, down from 2,500 last year, says IPI Executive Director Sean Conrad. When they aren't off doing conventioneer fun stuff, they'll be sampling the new parking technology.
We have now a real movement towards license plate inventory and recognition programs. The enforcement officers themselves are using handheld devices, which are all computerized. Those radio frequency identification systems that you see on the highway are also being used now in the parking industry.
See what you can learn on this show? Learn more at the website parking.org. And for those of us who are tired of getting nickeled and dimed by meter maids who catch us 30 seconds before we've dashed out to feed the meter,
we have a system now that you can pay by mobile phone. When you park at a spot, you just dial in a number. And if you run over time and you can't get back to that parking spot, you can increase your fare for however long you're going to be there.
What city would ever let that happen? They get too much cash from ripping off the parking public. As for the conventioneers themselves, they have ample parking, should you be driving an ample.
However you're going to arrive in Denver, whether it's at the airport or the public areas, the municipality, or even the convention center, every one of those individuals is a member of ours at IPI. So if you have any problems, you let us know.
However, mostly the parking conventioneers will be within walking distance.
The way this property is situated in the Colorado Convention Center is that our host properties are right there on spot, so people will be walking. They'll get a lot of exercise while they're out there.
If there's any justice in the world, every seat in their auditorium will have a parking meter next to it. All righty, that wraps up the Bohannon Show tonight. Chris Matthews of MSNBC's Hardball will be on the program on Monday night, so join us at that time. Thanks to our producer and webmaster, Mr. Paul Hill. We're at JimboTalk.net. Be sure to click on the JimboTalk.net poll. Our engineer is Zach Akey. I'm Jim Bohannon. Have a great weekend, everybody. This is Westwood One.